So today I'm going to be talking about death, rebirth and transformation. And the reason I've decided to cover this topic today is both from a collective and a personal standpoint. Because at the moment, the world that we live in, collectively, we're going through a death, rebirth, transformation process. And I wanted to give some insights into how we can help to understand the process and navigate the process in order to go through it and transition in a more effortless and painless way. So I'm going to use the death card of the tarot to help me to explain the different themes involved. And the death card, when people see the death card coming out in a tarot reading, they often feel fear. Nobody wants to see the death card. And in society, we have been programmed to fear death. And that's really due to a lack of spiritual awareness and understanding of what death really is. So death in the tarot card is really symbolic of a transformation or a change which is occurring in our lives. And that's really what death is. It's a portal to a new way of being. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the symbology in the death cards. So as you can see, we have a skeleton riding in on a white horse. And the skeleton is carrying a black and white flag here with a 5-petal flower on the flag. And below the skeleton and the horse, we can see on the floor the king is lying dead on the ground. And we have the queen and the child are in mourning. And the hierophant or the priest is here also. So there's lots of symbolic meaning in this card, and I'm going to go through little bits and pieces of it. So first of all, what this tells us is that nobody escapes death, even the king. So no matter how much worldly success we have, the material success, and how much we've acquired in our lives materially, or even how much mystical or spiritual knowledge we have, as in what the hierophant represents, none of this can protect us from the experience of death, because death, rebirth and transformation is a life lesson that we have to master as part of our soul's evolution. So let's look at the figure on the horse representing death. So death is kind of looming over the rest of the characters in the card, and that shows that the power that it has. When death comes along, there's no stopping it. When death comes in and change is happening, we can't stop it happening. We can resist it from happening, which actually causes us a lot more pain and suffering, or we can kind of bow down to death and allow the process to occur with greater understanding and more grace. So the skeleton, dressed in the black armour on the white horse, represents really our true selves. And that's what death is. Death is really about meeting our true selves. So the skeleton is used to represent that, because the skeleton is what remains of the body after death. It's the bit that remains in the physical world after death. So representing our true selves, because it's our soul that remains after the physical body has died and we've shed our physical body and we're moving into a new phase of life. So this can represent both physical death, but not necessarily, and usually when it comes up in the tarot reading, it's not about physical death. It's about a transformation that needs to happen, or that somebody is going through, or the death of a situation, or the death of a relationship, such as, you know, a separation or divorce, a change in life circumstances, loss of a job, or the ending of a career and the start of a new one. So really it represents this transformation and this change, this letting go of the old and embracing the new. So also we can see in the card we have the sun rising in the east, which is again this message of hope, that within death there's always the positive side of death, that if we're willing to let go of the old and let things be cleared away and not hold on to them, then we have the opportunity for this new beginning. And in the flag we have the five petaled flower, and the number five is a really important, significant number in relation to this subject as well, because five is the number of change numerologically. And then, yeah, we have the five elements of creation as well, which occur obviously throughout astrology and tarot, and many different kind of methods for understanding these subjects. So, the death card is Scorpio energy, and this is a subject that's very familiar to me and that I feel very comfortable with, because I have Scorpio moon, and people who have Scorpio moon tend to attract this death and go through this death, birth, transformation cycle many times in their lives, because that's one of the kind of lessons that they have to accomplish in their current life journey. So, or maybe they have also had a lot of experience in dealing with this in a past life, because our moon sign tells us about our past life. So often people who have Scorpio moon would have been shamans in a past life, because shamanism is very much connected with helping people to go through transformational cycles. Or also another profession which is closely associated with Scorpio energy and the death, rebirth, transformation cycle are midwives. So many people who are midwives would also find that they have a lot of Scorpio energy somewhere in their charts. So yeah, I've had my fair share of experience with this topic, and in particular over about 10 years ago I went through a massive death, rebirth, transformation cycle, and it was quite a dramatic and traumatic one at the time. I went through a huge spiritual awakening. I didn't really understand what was happening, or it took me a long time to understand what was happening, so it was very difficult to navigate. And at the time this involved a complete breaking down of my life as I knew it. My health disintegrated, my marriage ended, I sold my house, left my job, and my marriage ended, all within the space of a year. So it doesn't really get any more dramatic than that, because they often say that the most traumatic things we can do in life or that can happen are change job, get divorced, and move house. So I had all of those happen within the course of 12 months. Now, that was a particularly dramatic example of this. And as I said, at the time, at the start of the process, I had no real understanding of what was going on, because I didn't have any framework for understanding it. But as I went through that whole process, and I went through a process of spiritual awakening and really started to educate myself on the whole process of what was happening, then I really understood what was happening from a symbolic point of view. And when we understand what's happening in a symbolic way, it means that then after we go through that process, if we're going through a process like that again, it's less likely to be so traumatic, because we now have a roadmap for understanding what's happening to us. And often as well, that means that we don't actually have to make these huge dramatic changes in our external realities. Often it's more to do with what's going on the inside, and the death of a part of ourselves, a death of the ego, or a death of a way of being in the world, a death in the way that we maybe are in relationships, or it could be something specific that's happening within your life, such as changing career or moving house, or, as I said, the end of a relationship. So an interesting thing about this, and why I love delving into different subjects and bringing them together, especially the tarot and astrology and numerology and the chakra system, is that there's so many parallels and these things link up. So often by looking at a client's natal chart, or looking at your own natal chart, you will see information. It'll give you information as to what is going on with the person who's going through this transformational, you can call it a transformational crisis. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Recently I had a client who came to me who was in a crisis situation, a personal crisis, and it was in relation to family, and this person was having a huge upheaval in terms of their familial relationships, and especially with their children. And when I looked at the client's natal chart, I could see that Pluto was transiting their fourth house, which is the house of home and mother. And this person's sun was also in the fourth house. So this person's sense of identity was very much wrapped up in their role of mother. But the planet Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth and transformation. It's the planet that rules the sign of Scorpio. And that planet was transiting this person's fourth house, which was going to completely disrupt this person's whole sense of identity and their role as a mother. And this is a huge transition in life that somebody can go through. Another example would be at the weekend myself. I felt that I was going through a bit of a sort of mini death rebirth experience, and when I looked at my chart, I could see that Mercury retrograde was exactly conjunct my Venus, which is love, relationships and money, and it was forming a square with Saturn, which is limitations and restrictions. So this was really causing me to go very much into introspection in relation to my relationships and my career, because it was in my 10th house. And the Saturn energy there was causing me to feel very restricted and limited and quite depressed, because Saturn kind of is associated with feelings of depression. And once I understood what was going on within my chart and that this was just a process that had to be worked through, then it immediately helped me to process what was happening and move through the energy much more easily. But as you can see, if you don't understand what's happening, it can be very, very difficult. People can feel very confused, very lost, and very scared. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, this is something that can happen on a personal basis, but also it can be a collective experience. And we are going through that experience right now as a collective, with the massive changes that are happening in our world. And these changes have been predicted for a very long time. We have many ancient prophecies, such as the Hopi prophecy, the Mayan prophecy, biblical prophecies, which talk about the end of the world and the start of a new one. And the end of the world doesn't mean necessarily the destruction of the planet or anything like that. It can be the end of an old world structure and the start of a new way of living. Now, obviously, there's the naturally divinely intended new earth that wants to be birthed, and this kind of golden age for humanity that we're entering into. And then there's the hijacked, artificially created sort of transhuman agenda, which is trying to be forced upon humanity. And we have to be very psychically and spiritually awake to be aware of what's happening and how to discern between the two. So what I would like to say is, if anybody is going through a personal transformational crisis or is having difficulty coping with the changes that are happening in the world and navigating that, feel free to get in touch if you'd like to arrange an appointment to talk through these issues. I'd be more than happy to share my insights and hold space for you while you do that.